I'd say the U.S. has something. I think it's exclusive to the U.S. and it doesn't happen in every state and every city in the U.S. But something interesting to note is that in the United States, every year, around the United States builds around 1/5 to 1/2 of the required stock of homes in order for prices to not increase.
Hi, Ale. Thank you so much for coming. Let me introduce you. So, Ale Resnik is a MIT alum and the co-founder and CEO of Belong Home. Belong Home is a really great startup that makes renting magical for both homeowners and residents. Belong Home includes the best investors are the best in the business and include GGV Capital and A16Z. Thank you so much for coming, Ale. Can you talk a little bit more about your entrepreneurial experience?
Yes, absolutely. And just a small correction that we call the company Belong. Belong Home is the domain name for now until we get a new one. I thank you for having me here. It's a big pleasure. And for getting the voices of entrepreneurs out there. I started my journey in entrepreneurship started when I was pretty young. So I had the fortune of having a dad that got me a computer when I was 5 years old, and I started coding with that computer, and spent most of my childhood coding on BASIC and Logo and many other languages, Pascal. And when I was 18, I started my first startup, a domain name registered in Spanish, that operated for quite a while. Then I went to college, and I started out of college in e-commerce business, which strapped to 10 million in revenue. And then I had the opportunity to come to MIT for my master's. And then there I had a terrible experience buying a car. So I started a company to buy and sell cars online called BP. Operated that company for 5 years. We raised $150 million in venture capital. And I joined Andreessen Horowitz as entrepreneur in residence. And from there, I started together with my co-founder, Owen and Tyler, Belong, which is our take at how the rental market should work, helping homeowners manage the rental home, making it extremely easy for them so they can achieve financial freedom, and for renters, finally delivering the service that one deserves in a rental home and helping them build towards homeownership in the process. So it's what we hope is a fresh take how this very antiquated market should work.
I mean, that's pretty impressive to raise that much money. And, this company Belong has been doing really well. And at least, from what I hear from GGV Capital, I've heard that, whenever you guys send an email update, you always are crushing your numbers. And can you talk a little bit more about what makes Belong special in terms of the market and, the problem that both homeowners and residents have?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you think about the process of renting a place to live, this goes as back as the Roman times, so that we have recollection of. Now you could rent, have not obviously not a contract like we have today, but a kind of a contract, handshake contract. So you could rent a place to live. And to be fair, not a lot has changed since then, I'd say, right? Early 1900s, New York City, you wanted to rent an apartment, rent a home, right? Or anywhere in the United States for that matter. The process has been quite similar, right? What has changed since the 2000s is that you have companies like Zillow or Zumper that help you maybe search for your home in a better way, right? Maybe the process of applying to a home, right? Everything that happens in terms of the service that you get in the home, the relationship, how you request that something gets fixed when it's required, how you pay. The vast majority of those very basic things remain in the Stone Age. A crazy stat that I have for you is that as of 2023, more than 75% of rent payments happen with a check or cash. Right? So that's $750 billion that exchange hands every year in a completely informal way. And that's just the tip of the iceberg of how antiquated this industry is. So at Belong, what we are doing is we created a platform that makes it a breeze to upload your rental home. If you're a homeowner, we take care of absolutely everything. It's a beautiful product. And in a few clicks, you can schedule an inspection. You get your home listed everywhere. You get access to our payment system. You can finance almost anything that happens in the home in several payments. You have access to our insurance products all in one app. And we take care of absolutely everything with the resident that has the same benefits. They can get the renter's insurance. They can get payments set up. They can finance if they have expenses in their home. And all that happens in a very seamless way. And we also take care of absolutely everything that happens in the home. So we have nationwide reach to be able to dispatch a contractor anywhere in the United States. And that is a pretty big deal because we are moving towards a world in which we're able to operate anywhere in the United States. So it's a very exciting, I think, development for us. And more importantly, for homeowners that own rent a home and renters that we know, and I've been a renter until I was almost 40. We know that renters are not always treated the way that they should. So it's a company that is bringing the rental process, living in a home, to the 21st century.
Interesting. So, I mean, you mentioned a little bit about like different, I would say, products inside, this market. So there's payments, which you mentioned, it's like stuck into the 1900s or, like stuck into the past. But also there's insurance. There is like, there are a bunch of different areas. Can you describe a little bit, about the overall opportunity, why each opportunity itself is already big, and how and why bundling all of these products together makes sense, and why, like, how big this market is?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I usually like to talk about just the size of the rental market. Around 44 million homes, rental homes in the U.S., out of which around 10 million are in the hands of accidental investors, that accidental homeowners, actually, not investors, accidental homeowners, which means homeowners that did not set to own rent a home, or not professional managers, or not savvy business people. They're just people that, for one reason or another, they decided to that they don't want to sell their home. They move to another home. They move to the city. They move out of the city, and they have that extra home, and they put in the rental market. So that's the segment we're going after. There's 10 million rental homes in the hands of accidental owners, and it's a pretty massive market size. Have in mind that the average rental price of those homes is around $30,000 a year, right? So if you do the math, you have a very, very large opportunity just in the $300 billion of rent payments that we're going after. And the interesting part of that is that in order to put a rental home in the market as a homeowner or rent a home, you are required to interact with multiple different products in different industries that all of them are likely to be old school, right? So let's say silver bullet is that we have created a system in which everything happens at your fingertips inside of Belong. You need to get your rental home insurance, you do it with Belong. You need to finance something that happened in the home, you do it with Belong. You need to inspect the home, you do it with Belong. You need to do repairs, you do it with Belong. You need to understand how those repairs are going to affect your ROI, you do it with Belong, right? So all of those different things that actions that you needed to undertake as a homeowner in order to own a rental home, you can now do it in one seamless platform that puts everything together in a beautiful and carefully crafted customer experience. That's a very big deal because it opens up the opportunity for more accidental owners to do it, and then going to other segments as well. So that's on the homeowner side, right? On the renter side, there are a lot of people that are watching that are renters, because that's the reality of the majority of people in the United States. You have the rental market really in the US has experienced very little innovation, if anything. Everyone that rents, and most of the people that rent, have a really terrible story about renting. Bad relationship with the property manager, bad relationship with the homeowner, and Belong transform something that should be, it's today something terrible, or something that puts people down, such as renting a home, into a experience of service in which you are cared for and in which you're able to get the service that you deserve as a renter, plus making it extremely easy. Again, repairs happen at your fingertips. You don't have to be calling vendors. You don't have to be fighting with the homeowner, fighting with the property manager. Everything happens like ordering something on DoorDash. You need to get your renter's home insurance. It's a few clicks in the app. You want to get a secure deposit alternative, a few clicks in the app so you don't pay a deposit. You apply and you can get your answer in a few hours. It's really a step forward innovation for renters as well.
Interesting. So you talked a little bit about, some of the experience for the residents and homeowners, and that means getting repairs and things like that. And that's something that, if you look at a software startup, they usually don't adventure, right? But like looking at companies that have done well, so like Amazon, for example, has like a huge operation side of it. If you look at DoorDash, and there's I can think about a lot of the great companies that also focus on the operation side. Can you describe a little bit about the different parts of Belong, in terms of, like, it's not only software, right? And how does that make it harder for competitors to enter the market, and how it makes it Belong a special company there?
Yeah, you're absolutely right in this one. So there's an old saying that says, stay away from operations, never invest in hardware, right? Hardware and operations is like, no, right? You won't do it. I think it's, the opportunity is massive, right? Because in the operations world, like, not a lot has happened, right? There are companies, as you mentioned, right? DoorDash, Amazon, Instacart. What's interesting about companies that decide to embrace operations as part of the DNA is that the ones that figure it out create massive moats, right, that are extremely hard to overcome, right? Just because of the sheer difficulty of the task. It's not even a technological advantage; it's an execution mode. And at Belong, what we're trying to do is to take each part of the operations that needs to happen in order to manage the experience of a homeowner and renter in a rental home. Bear in mind that this is an extremely personal experience, right? We're talking about homeowners. Likely, their home is their most important asset, right? For the renters, we're talking about the place where you live, right? Which is nothing gets more personal than that. And if we have any problems there, we want to fix immediately. So what we take the approach at Blom is to ensure that we're using that operational complexity as an advantage in simplifying that and returning the, I would say, the benefits to the homeowners and residents, right? So you take something that is extremely complex, you break it down in parts, you build software to manage it as much as possible. As much as possible, you don't want to have in-sourced operations, obviously, because that makes it much harder, and you need a lot of scale in order to get to any form of unit economics profitability. But what we do instead is we break down the operational complexity into simple parts. We outsource what needs to be outsourced. We offshore what we need to be offshore. We build software for the pieces that need to be built, and then return those benefits in the form of great experiences to our homeowner renters. And that makes it, I would say, that is one of the biggest moats that we have as a company. One, I would say, is vertically integrating our offering. And the second is the difficulty of breaking down these operations into products and, I would say, work streams that deliver great products and services to our homeowners and residents. That is an extremely hard thing to do, and something that we battle every day to deliver excellence. And as we get it right, we build, I'd say, a competitive advantage.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. I mean, you mentioned hardware as well. And, if you think about as well, the top companies that are not only software, they build, something around. So, I mean, we mentioned operations, but hardware, you have Tesla, you have Apple, even NVIDIA. They are extremely valuable. So it's interesting to see that, the best companies, usually they marry software with something else. So that might be operations, which is the case of Belong and Amazon and others. And in the case of hardware, there are other companies like Tesla and Apple. So it's very interesting to see that trend. I didn't realize the hardware part as well. So let's go back to the market. You've mentioned the rental market in the US, right? And there are some interesting trends that I've been following. So one of them is it seems that buying homes has become more and more expensive over time in the past 50 years. So even in the past 5 years, if you look at the Schiller index, you have homes being like very, very expensive historically. So they are like 5 times the, I think, average annual income of the American.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you look at different cohorts, so like millennials, you see more rental owners. Is there a trend that you're seeing or that you've noticed in terms of renters and different cohorts that makes this market even more special in the US?
I'd say the US has something, I think it's exclusive to the US, and it doesn't happen in every state and every city in the US. Something interesting to note is that in the United States, every year, around the United States builds around 1/5 to 1/2 of the required stock of homes in order for prices to not increase on the rental market and in the home ownership market, right? Home buying and selling, if you want to call it. So every year we accumulate around half to 2/3 of the stock, I would say, debt homes. That is a massive thing that's happening. You see over time. The average home in the United States, yes, it became twice as large, but also 5 times as expensive. And you have a very big problem here today, which is that the average worker with the average salary in the United States, which is around 65 to 70K a year, right? That's the average income in the US. you have, with that salary, you're going to have a lot of trouble paying for a mortgage, and let alone with these interest rates for the average home, which is around 550K, right? So that creates a problem of affordability, and the way that that goes into the market is, and we can talk a lot about it, is you see rental prices increasing, and you see the price of homes increasing over time. You have a lot more acute problems in cities where that problem is even greater, like San Francisco, right? You have less of that problem in cities where the regulation is more lax in order to build homes, like in Miami or Seattle. But this is a massive, massive problem. And what we're trying to do with Belong is to fight yet another of the, I think, tendencies that we have in the market, which is that I consider really pernicious, which is the idea that today a third of the homes that come to the market are bought by a hedge fund or a large corporation instead of a real person. One of the things that we say at Belong is our mission is to
I didn't realize. Sorry, a third of the homes are bought by hedge funds, and
a quarter to a third, depending the area, are bought by corporations or hedge funds. Those are 2022 figures. 2023, we're still very bad. Maybe that has slowed down, but it's been increasing every year since 2010, since the financial crisis of 28, I'd say, up until the peak in 2022. And that over time, right, will create a world in which top 10 corporations own more than 50% of the housing stock. And that is something that future that we really don't want, right? It's a future that we don't think is a great future. So one of the things that we do at Belong is by allowing homeowners to, easily put their homes in the rental market. These homeowners can keep these homes. And the homeowners are real people, they're not corporations. They typically own one home. That increases the supply of rental homes from real people, reducing prices and the possibility to collude and other things that come from having corporations own that amount of homes. So it's something extremely important. Right? And if you think about it, and this is a very important concept, right? When you have a company like Blackstone, let's say, buy a stock of homes in a particular location or some others, like Invitation Homes or others, what happens is that what happens with those corporations is that they have built a massive, right, system that allows them to operate their home in a way that's profitable and in a way that that works well with the rest of their portfolio in that area, right? Or if you're a homeowner, right, an individual homeowner, you have one home, you don't have any of that advantage, right? You don't have a network of contractors, you don't have a network of inspectors, you don't have understanding of the regulatory environment. This is the classic problem that small and medium businesses face. Belong is exactly the force that counteracts that problem, right? That creates a platform where homeowners can plug their home into and get the advantage that much larger corporations get when managing that home in the market, get great returns on their asset, and therefore being able to keep those homes in the hands of real homeowners for much longer. I don't say that that's the only thing that should exist in the market. And again, obviously, we don't have any problems against large corporations, but we do think that an alternative in the market in which homeowners can use in order to have those advantages large corporations have should exist. And that's what we're building Belong.
Interesting. I never thought about these homeowners as SMBs, but I mean, they are SMBs, right? And like a huge part of the economy is SMBs, I think 40% or something like that. So you're basically tackling a vertical of SMBs, which are basically homeowners, right?
Right. And it's interesting because you're not the only one that hasn't thought about it. Like even homeowners themselves don't think of themselves as a small business. And that is one of the reasons that leads to so much frustration for homeowners that try to do it themselves or use a property manager, because they are a business and that home is an asset and it's a real business and it's a very difficult business to operate. So obviously it's not for everyone. And having the help of a company like Belong can go a long way to be able to keep that asset, that home, in the family for many decades instead of having to sell it a couple of years later.
Interesting. Do they operate like in your experience, do they operate like businesses? Do they register as a business and uh, like have operate like a business, or is it mixed? How is it work usually?
But in essence, they are a business. Right?
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, they have an asset, they have revenues, they have maintenance costs, they have taxes they need to pay, employees sometimes or contractors, 1099s that they need to work with. So in essence, it's a definition of a business to operate a home. It's just that homeowners, and specifically the ones that we work with, the accidental owners, the vast majority don't think about it that way. Right? But we do think that way about at Belong, and we help homeowners realize that there is a way for them to operate their home as a great business that provides amazing service to these renters that live in the home and be able to create returns that last for much longer.
I mean, I've heard that you guys have beaten every plan, and it seems that you guys have um, ambitious plans and things like that inside Belong. How how do you achieve that, and what makes Belong do really well?
Well, the first thing I say is that for a company that has operational complexity, the ability to plan and provide some real clarity of thought and execution is a must, right? Because if you have a company that operates or tries to solve a very complex problem, right? And in this case, you can imagine how complex operating a home is. It's one of the most complex things you can imagine in terms of a business, right? I mean, a home is a very complex asset with thousands of parts, thousands of interactions with your customers, right? So it's a pretty complex problem to solve. And specifically if you want to solve it well and not just, enforce contracts and, you sign a lease, so you have to provide nothing, right? If you want to really solve this problem well, this is a very difficult problem. And, and what's interesting, I think, about that is that, the complexity of the problem really calls for simple, I would say, reporting, simple execution, simple focus, right? Which I call, as I said, discussing with my investors often, great execution is nothing more than a singular focus, right? Understanding really well what matters, making sure that everyone in the company understands what matters, and making sure that everyone in the board understands what matters, and relentlessly driving towards that outcome. And you will be surprised at how rare that is, right? In terms of what you see in the startup world, right? So being hyper focused, right, is something that is an extremely important mode of execution, because then it's a matter of competence, whether you and your team can solve the problem. And that is a completely different conversation to have, obviously, but it's not typically why startups fail or why a team fails. It's not a matter of competence. It's sometimes the incompetence to understand the problem and understand what matters that makes people fail. So how do you connect that with planning? You need to have a very clear cadence of planning, right? With highlights the things that matters the most, that has one North Star, not hundreds, and that connects really well with your input KPIs that are several layers deep, right? So that you can understand really well how performance across every layer bubbles up, I'd say, to the top KPI, which is, in our case, it's been revenue since the beginning of the company to 2022, early 2022, and from early 2022, I think, to the foreseeable future, it's net income. That's what we're operating against, since we have the goal of becoming a profitable or cash flow positive company by the end of next year.
Awesome. That's really interesting, and yeah, you break down really well. So let's shift focus a little bit about your experience. So I mean, you went to MIT, there in Cambridge and Boston, then moved to the Bay eventually, right? And now you're in Miami, the capital of the capitals. There's there are a lot of interesting companies starting in Miami. I've seen the trend in terms of the US. It seems that we're seeing a little bit of decentralization. So you see a lot of companies being formed everywhere. Obviously, Miami is doing really, really well. So, there is Ramp, which also has been crushing it. There are a bunch of examples of companies being formed and starting in Miami. Can you describe, a little bit more about your experience about Miami? Some say it's the new Silicon Valley. I think even Bibi, the prime minister of Israel, was saying that the top regions that he sees in the world are Tel Aviv, Israel, and Miami. What made you move to Miami, and what makes it special?
So that's a good question. There's a lot of controversy here, and I have a very fond memories of my time in California and the Bay Area, in particular in Palo Alto, a fantastic city. I think when I moved to the U.S., first to Boston and then to Palo Alto, I was always searching for that vibrancy, right? That obviously, if you walk or bike the streets of Palo Alto, it won't strike you as the most vibrant place. Like it seems very quiet. But what you have is vibrancy of ideas, a vibrancy of discussions, and vibrancy of people that really anyone you were talking with was pretty much trying to do the same, which is starting a company, starting to change the world, benefit the world in a particular way. By the time I left with my family in 2022, we moved at the end of May of 2022. I felt, like, specifically post-COVID, that the vibrancy was no longer there, and there was a significant larger proportion of people that were, when I call it, I had a different perspective, a different intention in life, and a different idea what they wanted to do. And that prompted, at least me, the search for a new place to call home. And I think we found it in Miami, which is a city that it's growing. It's obviously not as big in terms of tech as the Bay Area is today. And I don't think that it necessarily needs to be a new Silicon Valley, right? But it's a city that it's vibrant. It's a city that has a lot of young talent. A city that has housing cost decreasing. It's a city that builds. It's a city that doesn't have a crazy amount of regulation, right? And it's a state that doesn't have income tax. And very interestingly, the people that you find here in Miami, you're going to find people that are on one side of the political spectrum, some other people that are on the other side of the political spectrum, but there's a ton of respect and debate and exchange of ideas. But at the same time, politics is not the number one thing that is discussed here on the day-to-day, right? People are mostly enjoying themselves, building. It feels kind of, I always say, like the United States of the 90s, right? Where you didn't have this culture wars and you didn't have all this tension between different factions and this tribalism. That is how I feel in Miami. And because of that, I think it's a very interesting insight into a possible future for the United States in general. If we wanted to get back to a society that is less divided and more pragmatic.
Interesting. Yeah. In terms of the polarity, I mean, personally, I think it's a consequence of different factors. I think people are not satisfied, for example, with housing costs in the Bay Area, and you know there are other factors that people are not satisfied, and then they need to somehow express that. And I think that's the way it ends up being expressed. And you know, you end up in cities like Miami, people are more happy. They are, you know, they're not focused on that. They're focused in just enjoying their lives, building and things like that. And that translates to the kind of conversations. I mean, that's my prognosis, but it's interesting that you mentioned that. I mean, that's my experience as well. I've moved to Miami, and the conversation also is a little bit different, you know, from the conversation there. And you know, you've mentioned like moving to the Bay Area and moving to Miami. And I'm originally from Brazil. I mean, you're from Argentina, hermano here. Can you, you know, describe a little bit more about your experience? Because from what I, you know, heard or read, you or your mom also moved around. You know, moved to Argentina first, and you eventually moved to the United States. Like, why was that move special? You know, why move out of Argentina, for example, or why move to Argentina in the first place?
Thank you. Yeah, great question as well. So, so my family has a story of immigration, right? I come from a Jewish family, so my grandparents, on my father's side, my grandmother came from Poland, grandfather Ukraine, and from my mother's side, both from Poland. They left in the early 1930s, so right before World War II, when anti-Semitism was starting to get really stingy in Europe. But it's interesting because half of my family, on my father's side, escaped communism, pogroms in the Soviet Union. Half my other half family escaped Nazism. So to me, I have a complete moral equivalency between those two ideologies, which I think are murderous. The only difference is that communism has good intentions theoretically, and it was not defeated in a war yet. Therefore, it's acceptable to say that you're communist, and even people look up to you. Some of them, if you study history, as murderers of the Nazis, just with good intentions. So when they immigrated to Argentina, obviously they had the United States as one of the possible destinations at the time. Immigrating to the United States was more difficult than to Argentina. They had more open immigration at the time. So my family came to Argentina, and then on both sides, my grandparents immigrated to New York, and then my mother and my father ended up meeting there. And then on both sides, they came back to Argentina, which is interesting, much later. And I then decided to come to the U.S. Yeah, I think it's a story of those families that are looking for freedom, a place that is going to give them the most freedom in order to build their life. And Argentina was that in the 1930s for sure, right? I think Argentina at that moment was a top 10 GDP per capita in the world. Being Brazilian, I'm sure you know, and now
Yep.
obviously we're 140 something as we increasingly adopted more socialism, right? And I think families go back and forth trying to search for freedom. Unfortunately, Argentina was that, no longer is. And the United States continues to be, which is why I'm so vocal about the fact that we should embrace capitalism, we should embrace freedom, we should embrace a libertarian form of government in which we can depend the least from the state and leave humans alone and let their creative energy take care of creating wealth, which I think is the most important problem that we humans have.
Interesting, very interesting. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Argentina, and it was a very rich country, and there is a lot of immigration of like talent out of Argentina. And I mean, even if you look at Mercado Libre, which is like the biggest Latin American company, the CEO lives in Montevideo, Uruguay, right?
Right.
And
Michael.
I visited Miami a few times. There are so many Argentinians there. There are a lot of entrepreneurs. You look at the best fintech investor, Milky Malka, I think he's like Argentinian. So there's a lot of talent that comes out of Argentina, and it seems that part of it is related to money. How money behaves in Argentina, and that might be related to mismanagement. So you have like extremely high inflation. But Argentina, has been moving towards the dollar, but we're starting to see crypto, Bitcoin, things like that emerge in the globe, which is an alternative, to the system that we have right now. And there are, that's not necessarily related to crypto, but like if you look at, for example, Europe, Israel is, my friend was telling me they have more unicorns in Israel than the rest of Europe. So like you have examples of places where innovation and you have a system that works well, can enable, right? And the US is a big example. That's why I would assume Argentinians do so well here in the US and maybe not so well in Argentina, is because here there was a better system. Do you see, with the change of money and how it behaves, how people may have more freedom of choice, could that change the future of Argentina and maybe other countries, or are there other aspects? This is more a future looking, so it's a little bit hypothetical, but you know a little bit more about Argentina, so would love to hear your opinion here.
Yeah. I think that if you think about the reasons why I talk about the more modern history of Argentina, like country that I'm from Argentina. I'm now also an American citizen, but I was born in Argentina and I have an Argentinian passport and I consider myself Argentinian. And if you look at the modern history of the country, like we defaulted a couple times in the last 30 years, our debt. We have had a very brief period fiscal surplus and the fiscal surplus and the in the the full budget. It's a country that is consistently and continuously has been spending more money that it creates, that it generates, right? And has been covering that gap with the printing of Argentinian pesos, which today, obviously, that's worth almost nothing. And the reason why it's worth almost nothing and a little less every day is because more is printed to cover the expenses that are out of control. It's a pretty simple concept, right? And inflation, as we know, is almost always, if not always, a monetary problem, not any other kind of problem. You want to complicate it very, very much and say that it's a production output. Yes, could be, but more often than not, if not always, as I said, it's a monetary problem. You're printing more than the market needs. And therefore things are more expensive with relation to that currency. To that end, I think that innovations like Bitcoin and specifically Bitcoin, which I think the most important use case today has proven a lot of value for crypto, has and can be an alternative. When you think about how Argentina should save, well, the dollar is an option. Another option is Bitcoin. The benefits that Bitcoin has is that you don't have to trust any politician, not even the politicians of the United States. That more will be printed.
Especially the politicians of the United States. I would say now that I live here.
Especially.
But
especially.
Yeah, everyone outside the US would be like, oh, I trust. But now that I live here, I'm like,
right. Right. You don't have to trust a human, right? You trust the system, you trust math, and you trust the algorithm that make Bitcoin possible. And that is pretty interesting, right, as a concept. Obviously, even with around 15 years in with that, still it's a pretty early form of currency that it has a lot of volatility and a lot of speculation. And the vast majority of people that speculate with it, buy, sell, and do different kind of trades that prevents Bitcoin from becoming a real reserve value. The other thing that Bitcoin didn't prove yet is that it's counter-cyclical, right? When the dollar loses value, Bitcoin gains value. When there's inflation, Bitcoin appreciates in value and has had almost perfect correlation with stocks, which makes it more of a bet than a actual reserve value. But I remain very optimistic that it's going to be a real reserve value. I own Bitcoin and I haven't sold them. So it's something that I believe in. But I think it's a long-term belief, not a short-term one.
Yeah, interesting. But I mean, related to that, I think my belief is that the rest of the world will upgrade to US dollars and then eventually will upgrade to Bitcoin because, the politicians here may be better than the politicians in whatever country. But when you don't have to trust these people, it's even better. But related to Argentina, I think maybe like there are other factors that I think affect innovation. Obviously there's regulation, which is a big part of it, and but in terms of money there's like tax rates. So if you look at California, you combine tax rate with like state and city, and federal taxes are pretty high, and then you have interest rates which are usually attached to the money that you have. And if you upgrade or if you move away from pesos or whatever, interest rates may change. And then you have the inflation, right? And when you detach the base, like the amount of money, the money that you use, you move the interest rates and then also inflation rate. I don't know the tax rates of Argentina, but I would assume that change of interest rates and the inflation could have a big impact, right? I'm not too sure. Do you have an idea of like how that compares?
Yeah, Argentina has an extremely complicated tax code with hundreds, 107 something different capsules. Um, it's an extremely complicated, full of regulation economy that doesn't have, I think, a clear regulatory matrix to incentivize the very much needed long-term investment, right? Um, we have state taxes that are pertinent to each of the states. We have 23 states, provinces in Argentina, I want to call it. And if you want to sell from one to another, it's extremely complicated. You need to register with tax authority of that different province, and some people even decide not to sell to another province, just not to do that. It's a very, very, very difficult way of operating. Yeah, I agree with you that what's required is not just stable currency, right? It's also a complete overhaul of regulatory system and tax code, so that the tax code becomes simple and significantly less predatory, so that you stop asphyxiating the people that produce value and start giving them some oxygen so that they can create some wealth.
Interesting. So I want to end in a good note. And one of the things that I've noticed is the trend of remote. So that doesn't necessarily mean, talking through the computer. It may mean as well, like having hubs in different places. So Belong, is based in Miami. Um, and I've seen more and more so, like, earlier stage companies being in the US being formed everywhere. So being formed in, they were mostly tech companies. They were mostly formed in California, and now it seems to me that they are formed everywhere. So like Seattle, there's Austin, there is Miami, there's New York. And even looking at IPOs recently, like Klaviyo is based in Boston and they are doing an IPO. But also remote is changing a little bit. I think, like, working through your computer. So I've seen startups hire Brazilians and even Argentinians. I have a friend that has a company in Brazil, and they used to hire Argentinians, and then the American companies realized that Argentinians are good, so they moved to Uruguay. And now they have like they know good talent in Uruguay. How do you see that changing, Argentina, for example, or changing the globe? Like, do you see a trend there? Do you see a trend in Miami? Like, how do you see that?
In terms of the talent,
Yeah, exactly.
I
The
think that,
talent and capital.
yeah,
Yeah.
uh, I think this is one of the greatest advantages. I think that you may have as an American company, be able to hire talent wherever. Right? At Belong, for example, we have the vast majority of our engineering team is based in Latam, between Mexico and Argentina. A lot of European companies don't have this advantage. For example, Germany, you can hire a developer outside of Germany, right, as a full-time employee. You have to do it in some other way.
Because of regulation?
Many other, because of regulation,
Oh,
many
wow.
European countries don't accept that kind of remote work, and that really stifles innovation quite a lot. I think that I'm a big believer in in-person collaboration, and at the same time, I think that there are certain tasks, sort of teams that, as a company scales, inevitably need to be separated. Even if you're in the same building, you go to a different floor. That is already remote work, like it or not. Your teams are no longer together. So every company needs to become remote as you scale. But I do believe that for very early stage startups, with seed, Series A, being together is a massive advantage. As the company grows, we're still organizing hubs, but we do have our engineering team remote. and it's really working for us. So I remain optimistic about that trend. I wouldn't call it remote, but I call it flexibility, right? For the workforce and employers to hire the best talent, wherever they are. I think that's super important. And then it's up to the company, the founders, to create a culture of in-person collaboration as much as possible. And that for some people is working together in office, for some other is getting together every month, from some others getting together to plan quarterly. I don't think there's a replacement for that. And that it's really a mistake to think that everything can be done remotely. But I am very excited about the flexibility.
Interesting. I hope that helps, Argentinians, help Brazilians, help Mexicans, help people everywhere. Thank you so much, Ale, for taking the time. I really, really appreciate it. I know how busy being a founder of a startup that's growing so much, and being focused. Thank you again so much for your time. Do you? How can people find you on the internet if they want to, hear your thoughts and things like that? Or yeah.
Yeah, they can find me on Twitter mostly. It's Resnik, or sometimes on LinkedIn, but mostly on Twitter, on x.com.
Awesome. Thank you again for the time.
Thank you, Gianni. I appreciate it.